Welcome to NTS Perspectives, a podcast by the Center for Non-Traditional Security Studies at the S. Rajaratnam School of International Studies, Nanyang Technological University, Singapore. Rising sea levels, floods, heat waves, climate displacement. These are some of the dire impacts of climate change affecting millions of people globally. The IPCC special report outlined that global warming is likely to reach 1.5 degrees Celsius above pre-industrial levels between 2030 and 2052, with the current rate of increase. Geopolitical competition and conflicts have added a layer of complexity in the world's efforts to lower carbon emissions. This episode will examine climate security amid geopolitical shifts, the impacts of climate change, and what states can do to realistically fulfill their climate goals. I'm Danielle, Associate Research Fellow at the Center for Non-Traditional Security Studies here at RSIS, and I will be your host for this episode. Today we have with us Major General Muniruzzaman, President of the Bangladesh Institute for Peace and Security Studies, an independent think tank in Bangladesh, and a former career military officer who served 38 years in active duty. General Munir is also the current chairman of the Global Military Advisory Council on Climate Change and advisor on climate change and energy security at the G20 consultative process. We're thrilled to have you speak with us on this important topic on climate security, General.
Thank you.
To kickstart our conversation, with the intensification of geopolitical competition between the US and China, what are the implications on non-traditional security studies today?
Yes, this is a very important, pertinent question. I think that with increasing tension between China and the United States, and in many places with the potential for conflict, there is greater emphasis on hard power or hard security. So both countries are looking at more potential capacity building in their military domain, which is essentially hard military power. And that takes away the focus and attention from non-traditional security. So we see a definite shift in the attention and focus by nations, particularly large and powerful nations.
According to a report by SIPRI, in 2024, military expenditure globally rose 9.4% from 2023. And as we know, the Trump administration has also shut down US aid, signaling shifting trends and priorities. So how do you think these trends would shape state approaches to NTS issues?
It will further weaken the state's approach and attention to NTS issues and concerns, because states are now more concerned about building up their own hard power capacity, which is essentially beefing up their military arsenal in view of potential conflict. This has also come about for the reason that we see conflicts raging in various parts of the world. For example, we have a conflict in Europe, in Ukraine, which is now a few years old. We see a tremendous amount of hardship and destruction in Gaza, for example. We have had other conflicts and smaller border skirmishes in both Southeast Asia between Cambodia and Thailand very recently, or ongoing protracted conflict in Africa. So the entire attention and focus of power, especially large powers, is now being focused on beefing up the military capacity. So therefore, we see a definite trend in the increase of military power spending. And that takes away the resources, that takes away the attention from non-traditional security concerns of the countries. You did mention very rightly about USAID. USAID, which has been providing humanitarian assistance and addressing a lot of non-traditional security issues all across the world, has now been defunct. Therefore, the resources that was allocated for this NTS cases is no longer there. It is a tremendous blow to NTS issues and NTS cases all around the world.
Let's zero in on the rise of economic fragmentation and great power competition. How do you think the ongoing trade war and US tariffs would impact Southeast Asia and South Asia in the area of climate security?
The ongoing tariff war with the United States, with the rest of the world, as a matter of fact, not only Southeast Asia or South Asia. In fact, this war is going on with the rest of the world versus the United States on the trade front. It is going to affect the economies of many countries. It is also bringing about greater uncertainties in the economic health of many countries, particularly countries in the global south. So therefore, countries in the global south, a number of them belong to Southeast Asia and South Asia, are becoming economically insecure. And when countries are economically insecure, they can't have attention on issues of non-traditional security that is normally there. So this is a period of great uncertainty, especially for the fact that much of the rule-based international order, particularly the domain of trade or the WTO regime, is collapsing. And in that environment, countries are forced to tighten their belt, and therefore they cannot allocate resources or pay attention to many of the ongoing NTS concerns or issues in their own countries. So I would like to illustrate my point by giving an example of Bangladesh. For example, Bangladesh houses a large number of Rohingya refugee population who have fled atrocities in neighboring Myanmar. And the number today is 1.1 billion people who are inside Bangladesh. They have been supported by humanitarian assistance and aid from the West and the United States for the time they have been here. But all that kind of humanitarian support and aid is now drying up. And therefore, there's a tremendous amount of stress on the Bangladesh's national economy, which is already resource-strapped and short of funds to allocate more money to the Rohingya refugee camps. And this is also bringing about greater suffering to the Rohingya population who are displaced and are living in Bangladesh. So therefore, any amount of economic uncertainties, any amount of downturn due to the trade war that is going on now has a direct effect on humanitarian issues and non-traditional issues.
What is concerning also is that several governments have already been backpedaling on climate commitments. So do you think that there would be a similar trend here in the Asia Pacific in terms of climate commitments and ambitions?
It is quite likely because whenever the money is short, when there are economic uncertainties in any country, limited resources many of these countries in Asia Pacific have go to more pressing issues. So commitment to climate issues will take a backstage again. Many of these countries are also coming under tremendous stress for food security issues, for example. And when countries have such issues as food security or other issues of immediate concern, climate doesn't come into priority, because climate is something which is distant. So many of these countries who have committed their resources, their time to climate change issues, are paying less and less attention to climate change. And this is likely to increase in the future.
The IPCC has predicted that the rise in sea levels and coastal erosion could lead to a loss of about 17% of land surface and 30% of food production in Bangladesh by 2050. Could you share with us more on the impacts of sea level rise on Bangladesh?
Sea level rise poses an existential threat to the state of Bangladesh. You very rightly quoted the IPCC's report where it predicts that Bangladesh will lose 17% of its current landmass if there is only a single 1 meter rise in the sea level in the down south of the country. We already know that in spite of any efforts, the sea level is rising. In many cases, it is now irreversible. So a 1 meter sea level rise in south of the country is predicted and is realistic. When that happens, the Bangladesh National Strategy Paper predicts that there will be a human displacement to the tune of 30 million people. And that is a massive number. In fact, it's equals to the size of the population of many countries. And when that happens, this displaced population cannot be absorbed internally. Initially, it will start to move inward and create a massive IDP population. And when that exhausts, then these people will look for other areas higher and drier ground, and that will result in transboundary migration. And when transboundary migration happens, it then ignites many of the regional issues of regional security. Bangladesh is bordered by India on all three sides, except for a small stretch of territory and a border with Myanmar and the seas in the south. So we are practically surrounded by India on all sides. But unfortunately, the Indian-Bangladesh border has been unilaterally fenced by India, and it is very rigidly guarded by the Indian border guards. Anybody approaching the fence is normally shot and killed by the Indian border guards. And the number goes as high as about 100 persons per year on the Bangladesh side. So you can imagine if that is the sensitivity of the hardened border between these two countries, what will happen when thousands and thousands of people try to cross the border and flee to India and migrate to India to save themselves from the rising sea. It will then end up in not only destabilizing Bangladesh, it will destabilize the region of South Asia. It will be ending up in a human catastrophe and a loss of human lives that we have not ever seen anywhere in the world. As a matter of fact, we have never seen 30 million people being displaced from one single country ever. And we are completely unprepared as a region, as international community, to deal with such numbers and figures. So this can be a very, very destabilizing factor for regional stability and security and for international stability and security.
I know, General, you said that Bangladesh or even the region is not prepared for such a massive move of people. So what has been done currently to prepare for this, maybe in terms of mitigation or adaptation strategies?
The 1 meter level sea level rise in the south of the country, in the Indian Ocean or Bay of Bengal, is probably irreversible now. Even if we do the right mitigation, perhaps we will not be able to stop this trend. Bangladesh internally has had a fairly effective and elaborate adaptation plan. But unfortunately, that adaptation plan implementation is expensive. And the International Green Support Fund that is supposed to flow from international donors and international players have not come in the tune of the promise that has been made in various COPs. So the adaptation plan has not been fully implemented. Parts of it has been implemented, indigenous Bangladeshi government fund and limited funds that have come from international donors. But I can tell you that even with the best possible adaptation, it can only slow down the pace of suffering. It is not in a position anymore that you can solve the problem. For example, Bangladesh is creating some sanctuary cities where IDPs can move in smaller numbers when it happens. But I'm very, very certain by the mathematics of it that it will overflow within a matter of some weeks and months. So those cities will not be able to absorb the excess population that is moving. And when that happens, then it creates internal destabilization process because then resources are limited and scarce. The host community in any place fights back the moving onslaught of displaced communities. So it destabilizes the population in that area. In some cases, we have seen in North Africa, we have seen in other parts of Sahel that a resource destabilization factor can bring in even social conflict. So we are in the process of understanding that those internal capacity building for adaptation is so limited that it will not even scratch the path of solution in any case when there are 30 million people being displaced. So Bangladesh's effort for any adaptation to address this issue perhaps is almost impractical and very limited in scale. Beyond Bangladesh, regionally and internationally, we are completely ill-prepared. As a matter of fact, I would like to say that we, as members of the international community, we are in a state of denial that this is going to happen. Although we know that this is going to happen, but we are burying our heads like an ostrich in the sand, hoping that nothing will happen. So that's the wrong approach. I've been talking internationally in many places, telling that this is going to happen, this is the reality, let's face it together. But yet, I see a complete approach of denial from most countries. For example, we have internationally adopted and classified all categories of refugees, yet we have not categorized anything in the category of environmental or climate refugees. So there will be displaced people who will not be covered by any international law. So therefore, they will not have any rights and any claim covered by international regime or international law. So that is a state of denial that we are in. So I would say very categorically that nationally, regionally, or internationally, we are completely ill prepared to face a challenge like this.
On the way forward for this, how do you think the international community could do to better be prepared for displacement by climate change?
First of all, we have to understand the threat and identify the potential numbers, which are massive. The next step should be an international legal understanding of how this should be classified and what are the obligations, what are the rights that come with that kind of classification. We then have to have both national plan, we have to have regional plan, and we have to have international plans for the movement of these people. If the movement happens in an organized manner, the disruption can be minimized. If it happens in a chaotic manner, there'll be anarchy. Anarchy can lead to total destabilization and insecurity everywhere. We have to remember that we live in a very interconnected world. So insecurity anywhere is insecurity everywhere. It will affect everybody. We have to have plans for resettling these people and resettle them within the region, outside the region. I'm also referring to, for example, the Pacific Island states, which are in great existential threat, and many of them will perhaps disappear altogether in the coming years and decades. Although the numbers of people are small there, but complete nations, when it disappears, it comes with a lot of international other issues and problems. So we have to understand those now and address those issues in advance. What I'm referring to, for example, when an island state of the Pacific disappears, it completely destabilizes the maritime boundary which has been built on UNCLOS, because the maritime boundaries are built on shoreline and baseline. And when they shift, it destabilizes other boundaries. But in this case, not only is it shifting, it is disappearing altogether. So what happens to the maritime boundaries of other nations? What happens to the EZs on which they had a claim once as a country or an island? Who will be the owners of that water? Will it be the same island state or somebody else from the neighboring state? These are grave international legal questions which we have to address, but we are not addressing them now. And that is what I am cautioning everybody internationally, that we are completely way behind the curve. We are running out of time. We have to organize ourselves much better.
What do you think is the largest barrier facing international cooperation on climate security?
I see a number of issues which need to be addressed much better and faster. And those are the hurdles that we face now. One is a perception in many countries, particularly in the global north, that this is a problem of the south. This is the third world problem. It is not our problem. And we can dole out some money and they can take care of themselves by having more adaptation or trying to solve them locally. But that is not the concept. It is not a single country's problem anymore. It is not a single region's problem anymore. It is a global problem. It is not only a global problem, it is a civilizational problem. This is a problem that has come about where we could completely destroy the human civilization that we know of now. It could completely wipe out regions altogether. All the development that we've achieved over the centuries could be wiped out in a matter of days or months. That is a feeling that I don't get in the countries where I go and speak in the West. They think that it's a distant problem and we can still save ourselves. I'm telling everybody that we are all in the same boat, rich, poor, black, white, whatever it is. We are all in the same boat. Either we move together, we sell together, or we'll all sink together. Coming down to more local problems, it needs a completely different kind of political leadership. This is not a general problem that can be solved in a short span of time, in a localized manner. It needs a far deeper understanding of the problem and the extent. It needs a deeper understanding of the scale of the problem, which also calls for international cooperation. But unfortunately, although I respect all political leadership anywhere in the world, but our political leaders are normally limited by 5-year cycles. They don't want to look beyond the 5-year cycle of their political life. You go and explain to anybody this is going to happen 20 years from now. You don't somehow ignite the tension in their mind. That's why I'm saying that it needs a kind of a visionary leadership that looks beyond his own country and calls and builds an international coalition of cooperation that has not existed before. There are the problems that we see in understanding, in the focus, and in the priorities.
How about for individuals and also non-governmental organizations? What role can they play?
They can play a very effective role in building up the awareness. They can play a role in the pressure groups, building pressure on their own governments, on the international community. They can play an effective role in mobilization, for example. So, in various ways, they can get involved in their own community, in the international community's efforts. But I'm happy to say here that I see a tremendous amount of energy in that space when people are trying to do something to help themselves and help others. When I go to the COPs, as you know, the COPs, I'm sure you've been to the COPs, you see the COPs are divided into two spaces. One belongs to the government and one belongs to non-government or civil society. The space belonging to non-government or NGOs and civil society is the most vibrant space, and it is bursting with life and ideas and themes and projects, everything. So I'm very happy to say that a lot is happening in the efforts by individuals, communities, groups, NGOs, civil society, but that should translate into government actions.
What do you think is the way forward for states on climate security amid the geopolitical shifts we see today?
First of all, climate security or climate as a case for international security has to be accepted by the international community. Unfortunately, the only pathway for doing that is for the UN Security Council to pass a resolution declaring climate as a security issue or a potential security issue. We have been unable to do that. Several times it was mooted by members of the Security Council to take this case, discuss and turn it into defining them as a security issue. Each time it was vetoed by China and Russia, and currently also by India as a non-permanent member. So some major countries in the world have blocked a resolution on identifying climate as a security issue. Unless we can do that, much of our efforts or the preparations for addressing climate as a security issue is falling much, much shorter than what it should have been. Even as nations, we are very ill prepared to cope with the concept of climate security. GMACCC, or the Global Military Advisory Council on Climate Change, did a survey globally of over 100 countries on trying to identify how nations view climate. Do they see only as environmental change, or do they identify that as a national threat or a security issue? Interestingly, more than 100 countries in their strategy paper identified climate as a national security issue. But yet, they have not done anything beyond identification, because mere identification is not enough. You have to have then the response strategies, how to counter the threat. That we did not see in most countries, including Bangladesh. So we have to educate people, tell the policymakers that we have to have a holistic understanding of the threat and then have counter strategies how to meet the threat. So those spaces are completely vacant now. So as I said at the beginning that we are way behind the curve, we need to act on an urgent basis so that we are at least partially prepared.
What are the linkages between climate change, conflict, and water security, and what are its effects on national security and interstate relations?
Climate change has great negative impact on water consumption, and water sharing. It has tremendous negative impact on transboundary river and transboundary water sharing. I will amplify this by saying that due to climate-induced condition, our water cycles are changing. In the context of South Asia, our monsoon patterns are changing. In the context of South Asia, I would say that many of the water reservoirs are drying up, the same we see in Africa. So what happens is that water is becoming a very scarce resource. South Asia, which is home to one of the largest human population in the world, is also perhaps one of the country, one of the regions that has tremendous scarcity of water. Large number of people in South Asia or in Asia or globally don't have access to safe and clean drinking water, for example. Waterborne diseases are becoming more and more prevalent and rampant due to unhygienic or unclean water. From water, we see a number of threats. We see water as a threat for disease because of climate-induced conditions. We see water shortages that can become a source of conflict or destabilization internally or a interstate basis due to climate-induced condition. And we see water as a source of potential tension and conflict because of sharing of water on a transboundary basis. For example, the Indus Water Treaty, which has existed for many years and decades, has now become a source of a potential conflict between India and Pakistan because India has unilaterally suspended the treaty. We see grave concerns between sharing of the Brahmaputra River between China and India because the Brahmaputra River, which is one of the largest river in the South Asian basin or the Himalayan basin, originates from Tibet area in China. India alleges that China is building dams over that river. So that will reduce the flow of the water in the Brahmaputra River. And this is bringing up more tension between these two countries, China and India. But also remember that all these three countries that I mentioned have one of the largest militaries in the world. They're also nuclear-powered countries. They also have a history of conflict between them. India and Pakistan have fought many wars. China and India has fought a war in 1962. So any amount of tension or a potential conflict over water can be a source of great concern globally, not only for South Asia. In our analysis, we sort of see that if ever there is a hydro conflict due to climate-induced conditions anywhere in the world, it will perhaps be in South Asia because it has one of the largest concentration of population and it has also got tremendous water scarcity due to climate-induced conditions. So water security, hydro conditions, potential for hydro conflict due to climate-induced conditions are of grave concern to South Asia and the rest of Asia.
In the past few years, with the conflicts and geopolitical shifts taking place, it does not bode well. But have there been any positive developments that you've observed?
I have. There are two aspects to this question. One is we also unfortunately had to admit that the militaries of the world are the single institutional polluter anywhere in the world. Our ships, our tanks, our armored vehicles, our heavy guns, our fighter jets, they are great polluter. So as an institution, the military has been identified as the largest polluter. But happily, this institutional pollution problem has been identified well and taken well by the most militaries. So I see an effort by many militaries and many countries to green themselves in the military. The military, in my language, I would always say that has the largest carbon footprint. And the militaries, out of the realization, are trying to reduce that carbon footprint that they have. So that is a positive thing. Many militaries and many countries are addressing the issue by building up capacity for response, but in a disjointed manner. It needs a whole of government and a whole of society's approach to build the capacity within the military and with the civil military cooperation to build a wall or build a response mechanism to address the threat which is great and grave. That effort I don't see in countries, but they are making disjointed small steps and small efforts here and there to build capacity, which is again a positive thing. But at the same time, the pace of development in the climate threat or climate security is so rapid that we have to act extremely fast if we have to manage ourselves and build some capacity to counter it.
What are some AI applications for climate security, and have countries in the global south adopted these tools to tackle the climate crisis? And do you think that they can benefit from these technologies?
AI is a great tool to understand the climate threat and climate security. AI can identify most of the threat scenarios far faster and better we've also seen AI's capacity in crunching the numbers rapidly to analyze the threat and then pinpoint where the resources must be allocated. AI is also able to do threat mapping of a particular country or a particular region and identify what are the solution pathways. AI is very, very capable of resource requirement and resource allocation. AI has also predictive capacity. So AI can also help us in guidings to see where the threat might come from in the next decade or the decade after that. So AI as a tool in terms of dealing with environmental threats, in terms of climate security is great. In the global south, the general application of AI is very limited. I haven't come across many countries who are devoting much of their AI capacity or AI tools application in addressing some of the climate threats and climate security issues. I think we are not there yet, but I can say very confidently that AI is a great tool in addressing, analyzing, threat mapping, resource allocation, everything to do with climate security issues. AI has an opposite sort of impact in terms of consumption because it is taking up a lot of our energy, it is taking up a lot of our water. Every time you press that button on Gemini, you are eating up water, you're eating up electricity. So that is the downside of the negative part. But provided we can make the better use of AI, in terms of addressing pressing global issues, pressing national issues, also in terms of environment and climate change, then that kind of a consumption that AI has is perhaps worth it. It can be more beneficial to allow that consumption, provided we are making the best use of the analysis that AI can give us. I'm all for AI to identify the threat and also AI to help us in finding the right pathways for addressing those threats and the solution, in spite of the fact that AI is a large consumer or a heavy consumer of both power and water.
Thank you so much for joining us today. Really glad to have you on our first episode of NTS Perspectives.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
You've been listening to NTS Perspectives, brought to you by the Center for Non-Traditional Security Studies at the S. Rajaratnam School of International Studies. Thanks for tuning in.